Okay, welcome everyone. Just wanted to call out really quickly that we'll be looking at all of the conversation and the questions that you're asking in that chat window. So as we go through this, if you've got kind of burning, pressing questions or something you want to add, definitely share that and we'll do our best to address those. Session really interactive. Let's kick things off really quickly with a sort of short round of introductions. My name is Casey Jones. I'm CEO of Better Growth, and I'm just going to be here moderating Ripcord's two new product leaders. So Ahson Ahmad, our brand new Chief Product Officer, and Jason Likins, our new VP of Product Management. And I'll kick it off to them to just give a quick intro to themselves and their background and kind of what has brought them to Ripcord.
Thanks, Casey. I guess I'll start. Jason Likins, happy to be here. I've been in the software industry for a number of years now, across content management, automation, technologies, and it's a good fit with Ripcord, especially now with their hardware side of their business. So I'm really excited to be here and tell you a little bit more today about what our offerings are.
Fantastic. Ahson?
Yeah, my name is Ahson, and I've been in the content management and imaging space for a couple of decades. Next with Alfresco, with Documentum, and super excited to be at Ripcord because what we do here is very unique, and excited to be here as Chief Product Officer.
Fabulous. So I wanted to kick things off with, I think, something that is really basic to the industry and one of the most common questions I know that Ripcord gets, which is, how is Ripcord similar, different, or complementary to this whole concept of robotic process automation?
RPA. Yeah, I'll take that. That's an interesting question. We get confused with that a lot because it sounds very familiar about what our robots do in automating a process, but no, our robots are a little bit different than RPA. RPA is a software technology. It's a newer technology that uses some old concepts to do screen scrapes of a user's application UI interface, and then they can automate users' actions within the screen in an intelligent way. And this has become very popular recently because it allows this concept of a citizen developer to create and record their own automations for repetitive tasks really easily without being a developer involving the development group. Our robots, on the other hand, are more of the physical kind, and they automate the process of scanning and digitizing paper. We also have some software bots that use AI and machine learning to intelligently classify and extract metadata from that unstructured content that we scanned or from things that are already digitized. That metadata that we extract and enrich through those processes could be complementary to an RPA environment where we could feed it for unintended operations within the RPA automations that they build. But basically, different technologies. They sound similar because we have robots and we do automation, but we're more complementary to them and slightly different.
Got it. I think that's super helpful. So I'm curious, in kind of the robotics technology industry as a whole, what are you seeing as some trends that are coming up in 2019 that people interested in the industry, people wanting to take advantage of it, should kind of keep their eye on?
Yeah, so I'll take that. So I think what's really interesting about robotics and where we are now is, robotics have, machinery have really been the trigger that fueled the Industrial Revolution. If you look at, just heavy industry, factories, assembly lines, this is all machinery and robots that fueled all of that. And I think as we sort of evolved that technology, they're able to do more complex tasks. And we've now seen in China 3D printing kind of robot that can build houses, and more complex things. And I think what we're going to see in 2019 is, now that we have matured AI and machine learning as a software technology, and we're seeing that now integrated with the hardware and robots, we're going to start seeing robots that can do, and we're already seeing this, but we're going to start seeing robots that are going to enter the enterprise and start doing knowledge worker and other tasks that can start making decisions about, what I should do in a particular set of repetitive tasks, but choose the right one depending on the situation. Like, for example, do I push a piece of paper or do I take out a staple from a stack?
It's exciting. Okay, so within that landscape, who is Ripcord? What does Ripcord really do, and what does Ripcord do differently than everyone else out there in the industry?
I think Ripcord's robots are unique, and it separates us from any of the other software companies out there. So we're a hardware and a software company. So we provide a single platform to scan, enrich, and manage all your content. That's unique in the industry. You'll have scanner vendors, you'll have OCR vendors and repository vendors. We have all that under one roof. So we classify our products into three groupings: robotics, recognition, and repository. So the robots digitize the paper records into electronic formats. Our recognition software picks it up from there and uses some machine learning AI technologies to generate high confidence metadata during that process. And then we can push it to various places, including our repository in the cloud that provides a secure and accessible way to access your content. So, basically we take unstructured dark big data and enrich it with a structured taxonomy so that you can store it in the cloud, as well as use it intelligently to drive other downstream processes like analytics, automation, and integration with your primary line of business applications.
Okay, super, super helpful. And I know that you two have put together some slides to give us a little bit more insight into your vision for Ripcord and a product and Ripcord's kind of role in this space. So I'll kick it over to you two to share that now.
Okay, so I've never done this before.
Upper right corner share.
That looks like a share the event.
So here you.
Yeah. So while that's being pulled up, I can talk a little bit about the genesis of Ripcord. And so we were founded a few years ago, really looking at the problem of the vast amount of paper that's being stored in all these warehouses across the United States, across the world. Despite us going digital around the world, our paper consumption globally is actually increasing. The amount of unstructured content is growing astronomically as the tools to start producing that content become super easy. And so, according to IDC, less than 1% of that unstructured data actually ever gets analyzed and looked at. And so there's all this dark and hidden data in all this content that we keep producing that businesses and organizations, which may legitimately have very valuable data in, whether it's just for discovering potentially new opportunities in terms of business models or business value. We're seeing use cases in oil and gas where companies are finding new or rediscovering old potential oil fields that were analyzed years and years ago on paper, but sort of lost in the archives. And other cases like that where we discover that. We're also seeing use cases around compliance. And so there's just this enormous amount of paper, and the thought of sending this to a human when the paper is potentially fragile, where it's potentially there's security issues and there's sensitive data on it, and there's speed concerns and accuracy concerns, and we really looked at it from a new perspective and said, what can we do differently than the industry does, and hence we introduced the concept of a robot that can do this. And so
hopefully you can see my screen and you can see the start of the deck.
Yeah.
Okay, so just let me know when you need me to kind of.
Yeah, so you can advance through the second slide. So I think we just talked about this already, which is the idea of lots and lots of content out in the world. Casey, did you advance that to slide 2?
Yeah, can you not see that?
Yeah, if this doesn't work, then we can just talk.
There you go.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so basically what we were talking about was just the amount of paper that is out in the world, and so how does that get digitized in today's solutions? You have to ship a set of boxes to a warehouse, to store it, and then when you're ready to digitize it, you would then send it to a scanning bureau. There's a bunch of people that actually open up the boxes and go through each of these sheets of paper or stacks of paper, remove all the different fasteners. You can have binder clips and paper clips and staples and folders and all this kind of stuff. It's manual, it's error prone, and then they take all the sheets and then they scan them. And then once that all gets scanned, you need to put them somewhere so that you can get access to them. And usually the companies that provide the imaging solutions are not the ones that provide the content access solutions. And so then you have to work with another vendor to then implement an enterprise content management system or something like that, or a records management system, and then do an expensive integration that's somewhat brittle to connect all these things together. And then sometimes you actually need to power your downstream business processes and your ERP systems like SAP or Oracle, and then just connect that up as well as an integration. So this can be pretty complicated and requires lots of people and almost like a PhD to connect all these things. And that's today's world. And so if you advance the slide.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that's fine. So
okay.
So basically what does Ripcord do is we built these robots, and you can see a screenshot or a picture of our factory here. But we basically are able to feed these work cells with stacks of unsorted paper of different sizes with an arbitrary number of staples in these different documents, and the robot will actually take care of the rest. So it actually has a look at all the different pages as they come through and makes intelligent decisions about what it needs to do in order to process the sheet. And then if you go forward to the next slide, we not only so we not only separate the sheets apart and scan them in the traditional way, but this is done at very, very high speed. And so you can see that we have this kind of conveyor methodology, which sort of sends the sheet down this conveyor belt, and we scan the content. And we don't just scan it at a regular resolution, we scan it at high resolution, 540, 600 DPI, which is the highest in the industry, at the speed that we're able to do it at. And not only that, we're talking about, where does the machine learning and where does the AI come in? These robots are constantly learning and getting smarter about, staple detection and, for example, blank sheet detection. So is there really text on the page or not? And if there isn't text on the page, then, we can simply just ignore it. And so then you don't have redundant or unneeded data when you end up getting it into your end repository.
And I think just to add something there, Ahson, I know you're well aware of it, and I think it came up on a question earlier. The robots are very good versus some other scanners in treating paper that may be old and brittle. So it's use of air and a pulling mechanism and moving documents around, the paper around through that air, not putting it through any rollers, not doing any grab to pull it into the system. As this paper's been around for 50 or more years, sometimes it starts to get brittle, and that's a concern of people when they're using traditional scanning environments as well.
Right. Yeah, the traditional scanner has these pinch rollers that actually grab and push the paper through with friction, and we don't do any of that. And so that's also very, very unique about our solution.
Yeah, it's if you have that specific use case, this is a great solution for it.
Yep.
Casey, back onto that next slide. That's slide 6.
Yeah.
So as Ahson was mentioning, paper and documents is still the primary way to communicate, especially in business. So after we scan the paper, we have a post-process queue where we start doing OCR and further content enrichment using some machine learning to do entity extraction. So in this case, as a accounts payable and looking to automate, extract some values out of the invoice and use those values intelligently to drive some automation processes. So Again, we're doing the enrichment. We're serving it up in a structured way back to the main application so it could process its the content within the document. In this case, automating an accounts payable. So we have field level entity extraction. If you go to another slide.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the first one, you might be using that in that case of an invoice to drive an automation process downstream. This is an oil and gas exploration well record. Yeah. And as Ahson mentioned earlier, a lot of the companies now are re-looking at their old well logs and the geological reports that they did and trying to feed them back into their analytics system to see, hey, 50 years ago, we looked at this, the price of oil was $10 a barrel or whatever it was. The technology to extract the oil wasn't as advanced, and the decision was made back then not to drill. In today's world, prices over $50, $80 a barrel, new technologies like fracking and such, companies want to go reevaluate that information, but it's no longer in the application, it's no longer in the database, it's all stored away in paper. So again, we can do this entity extraction intelligently, surface that information in an enriched, structured way, and serve it up to the analytics application, and they can redo and make their decisions. So well logs is another example. And going to the next slide.
And so while you're doing that, there's a question that just came up about, is zonal OCR used for particular data extraction?
So OCR will get the full text, and then we have zonal extraction as well. So, anything from an XY coordinate to a region to looking for a label. So maybe that information isn't exactly on a certain part of the screen, but we have the ability with our intelligence to recognize the doc type and then know the entity we're looking for and kind of what its characteristics are so we can find it on the page. So we have different options and different ways to do that zonal entity extraction.
That's right. And not only can we do zonal-based extraction, but we can also do entity extraction based on NLP technology. So in other words, we can figure out if we're seeing a social security number, we can figure out if we're seeing a phone number, any kind of personal or PII data. We can identify people's names and credit card numbers. And so we could also pull that information out, potentially to redact it, or to put some additional security policies or retention policies on that content. Because remember, we also have the repository and the records management piece to be able to have one integrated solution where something that we discover here can be enforced later down the line.
Yeah, and that's the key really in the recognition part of the software, is to have high confidence recognition because you're using it to drive some very important downstream processes. In the case of the well log, hey, I'm going to make is this pay worth drilling or not? And these are multi-million-dollar decisions, if not more. And you want to have a high level of confidence in the data that's being extracted. So we're kind of hanging our hat on our high confidence data extraction that's used for automating those business processes, doing analytics, search and discovery, as well as Ahson mentioned. There's a lot of personal information, GDPR type stuff out there now, and with those regulations now in place, if you can't find and identify what's personal information when someone asks to be forgotten, you'll have a hard time being in compliance with that regulation. So there's a lot of different use cases, including the one of just passing it over to our repository in an intelligent way so we can do those automated captures, setting up those access control lists, and putting retention policies based on the doc type and the entities extracted. So using that intelligence. This screenshot here shows a little bit more. Again, we have the high fidelity resolution and color. So, there's not always just text, there's graphs on there as well. And in this case, we also have some tables and columns, which always gets a little bit tricky with OCR and entity extraction it typically wants to read left to right, but these kind of go top to bottom. And again, our intelligence will recognize that and do the key value pairs correctly when it does the extraction.
And so there's a, we'll move to the next slide, but there's also a question here about, how do we build QA into the process? And that's a good question, because I think when, we started out, we were thinking about this idea of a robot, and the robot would simply scan everything. And then we realized that there's, a whole process around kind of validation and QA and handoff back to the customer in terms of, the content that's been extracted and that high confidence. And how do we ensure that? And so we actually have a whole process in place to do that here. So we do have QA stations where we take some percentage of the content and we verify it as part of our process. And then additionally, we give a staging area to the customer where they can validate content if they want to in terms of the extraction, and then approve it before we put it into a production pipeline. And so that's really another distinction of Ripcord, is this idea of just being a full turnkey service, a white glove service where you just hand us your paper, your boxes, even your digital content, and we'll actually design the templates. We'll take care of setting up the zonal OCR recognition projects and so forth, and you really just get your data at the end of it, and we do it in a very seamless way and very, very quickly in terms of turnaround. Partially because of the speed that we're able to do so with the robots. And so then where does all that content go? So we have obviously different use cases of where you want that content to go, but some of the most common destinations for content end up being into just a repository where users within the organization can go and find that content. That's like the first level, is like, where's my content? How do I find it? Can I do a full text search on it? And so we're providing, as part of this service, a SaaS-based UI that's in the cloud. So your content is exported there, and users are able to just run searches, various filters on the metadata, able to view the content in that high quality that we're scanning at. They can also share that content securely with people inside or outside the organization, including using things like password protection that we've seen in many of the consumer file sharing apps. There's also the ability to do redaction on the content, not just on sections of the content, but also sharing specific pages of the content, annotation capabilities in terms of collaboration. And then, of course, the ability to set up some of these extraction templates within the Canopy interface for digital content as well. So that's all provided by us as part of the service. And if you just move forward one more.
Yeah.
One of the concerns certainly with the content of a customer being in the cloud is, and also being processed through our facility is, what about security? And so because of our robots, there's obviously minimal human interaction with the source analog content. And then once we actually digitize the content, we're encrypting all that content in transit, as well as it when it reaches the repository destination at rest. And so we're also doing what we call chain of custody tracking. So the moment that your content reaches our facility, to the moment that it gets into the software, and then on an ongoing basis, as people are making edits and changes to that content, we actually have a full chain of custody of a sheet of paper or a document, exactly what happened to it from the time it got to us. We also have, as I mentioned before, records management and retention policies baked into the software. And so you have the ability to set up your different disposition policies. If you have regulations that say, hey, you have to keep this content for 3 years or 7 years, depending on the type of content, you can set up all those policies. And then because we have this automated classification engine, we can actually automate that whole process and say, hey, if we find a piece of content that's an invoice, maybe we can get rid of it after a year or two. But if something has PII data in it, and maybe invoice may actually have some of that data, but then we may need to retain it for 7 years. So we're able to automate that as well. So if you move forward, and then the other piece of this is sometimes the kind of content that we're dealing with. We talked about invoices. A repository may not be the right destination for this content, right? If it's not knowledge-based content, documents that have more information about kind of processes that the institution needs to manage, but rather more transactional things like invoices and claims and accounts payable type documents, purchase orders. Then I want to send this into maybe my ERP system, or maybe I want to send it into Salesforce to be able to connect it up to the records and the opportunities that I have in those systems. And so we have integrations available to some of those enterprise apps, and we have APIs and connectors that allow us to expand that over time. And so you can see some examples of systems that we're able to integrate into. We can also integrate with your content management systems. I read a study recently that organizations have multiple repositories, some up to 3, some even up to 6 in their organization. And so if you have a repository already and you want to have your content and your data that we've extracted from that content to be exported directly to the enterprise content management system that your organization uses, Ripcord's able to do that as well. Whether that's one of the repositories shown here as examples, or anything that uses the content management interoperability services protocol. And then just to wrap up, in terms of how Ripcord is different, I think that should be fairly evident. But if you look at a traditional scanning bureau, you certainly have to send them your boxes as you would with Ripcord. But I think the difference there is there's a lot of manual handling of the documents. They're unable to sort of remove fasteners in an automated robotic way, the way that we're able to. So there's more risk of damage to your paper. And then on top of that, the scanners that a traditional scanning bureau will use are off the market or off the shelf scanners. That can be, commercial level scanners, production level scanners, but still these scanners use friction to handle paper. And I think we talked about this earlier, but fragility is also important in sometimes preserving documents if you want to keep the original documents. But even just being able to scan the content, you don't want to scan the content after you've torn the paper. And so tears and this kind of damage is very, very limited when it comes to Ripcord, because we are using a non-friction based mechanism to do scanning. And then I think the major difference, of course, is just in terms of speed and accuracy. So because we're able to automate the process of taking apart documents and scanning them at super high quality, at a very, very kind of high speed and with high accuracy, you can see a project that you would take with a traditional scanning bureau and compare it to what we would do with robotics enabled scanning at Ripcord, and maybe be able to do it in half or even a quarter or less of the time. And so, when we've compared the average amount of time it takes a traditional scanning bureau to actually scan a banker's box worth of documents, that could be anywhere from 8 hours to 10 hours or more, depending on the content. And at Ripcord, we're able to get that down to 2 hours with maybe about 15 minutes of prep. So the contrast in terms of time is marked.
It's huge.
Yep. So, and then in terms of other traditional software vendors that also offer kind of imaging products to be able to do the scanning, yes, they can provide you the capabilities to do OCR, to do extraction, but I think the major difference is there's no integration, right? So you're on your own. You've got to go send your person for training. They've got to go learn that product. Some of the products that we've looked at, it's like 40 hours of training in order to just get over the hump to set up your recognition projects. And so because we're a turnkey service, the customer just hands us the content that they want scanned. They give us the requirements, and we actually design everything for them in terms of the scanning pipeline, and we verify it with them before we put that into production.
It's impressive.
And then the other piece of it is, of course, the stitching together of the integration. So if you want to then push this to an endpoint system like your ERP system or your ECM system, then what you're going to see is that, if you own all that, number one, it's a headache for you to do that. But number two, there's a lot of hidden costs. But number three, it's complex and the integrations are brittle. And because Ripcord sort of handles this end to end, again, it's a turnkey service. Your content will end up in either the repository that we provide or the repository of your choice. And because there's no on-premises software involved in terms of the scanning and in terms of the repository we provide, it's very easy to maintain. Upgrades are seamless, and I don't think I stressed this really throughout this conversation, but we are a cloud-first offering, and so there's all the benefits that you get of being in the cloud, you get with Ripcord.
But with some pretty hefty security measures in place, which I think is typically the one concern about cloud software.
Yeah, that's right. And we talked about security on one of the previous slides, but
yeah.
Certainly we encrypt everything at rest, in transit. We take security measures with your documents, when it's with us in our facility. And then, of course, because robots are doing the actual page-by-page scanning, you're not having a human actually parsing through this and looking at the content.
It's a key component, I think.
Yeah. So just, in summary, in terms of how Ripcord's different, we're integrating, these 3 R's of Ripcord. We talk about robotics, recognition, and the repository. So you can basically take your stacks of content, whether it's physical or if it's digital, and feed it through our pipeline. And we can extract value out of that content. We can convert all that text into searchable content, and with high accuracy and at breakneck speeds. So that's kind of a summary of what I wanted to go through in terms of answering your question about what is Ripcord.
That's super helpful. So throughout all of this, you both have mentioned a few different use cases, but I'm curious, I have a feeling that that's kind of the takeaway for a lot of people is, what are some of the most kind of advantageous and most common use cases that you feel like Ripcord is going to really play a key advantage?
Well, I mean, we've had traction in a number of use cases. I'll give just a few examples. One of them is certainly, I think we talked about the oil and gas space. So the idea that you have stacks of content that you have value in and you want to rediscover that value. And in their case, they're looking for oil well information where they might want to make a decision about going and drilling now that the value of a barrel of oil and the cost has changed markedly in the last 50 years. So that's an interesting use case that we're looking at. So this is a use case of rediscovery of information and surfacing insights that would otherwise take a very, very long time and be very manual to find. Another use case, we're working with a large financial services company on auto loans, and we're speeding up their cycle time. So today it takes them about 45 days to be able to sell a loan. And as you know, if you bought a house or had any type of loan, loans are often sold. And for a financial services institution that owns a loan, they want to make a decision about risk. They want to make a decision about whether they want to want to sell that loan. And just in order for them to be able to sell that loan, they have to have all the proper documentation linked up together and in place so that they can sell that loan. Yeah. And so today, the company we're working with, it takes them about a month and a half to get all that information, that paper together from various branch offices that they have. So what they're looking for from Ripcord is to reduce that cycle time so that they can sell those loans faster, recognize revenue more quickly, and reduce and mitigate their risk.
Yeah.
And then the third use case that we've sort of been looking at is in terms of e-discovery and just general like GDPR type use cases where there's PII data, personal information that's on the documents. This is if your social security number, your credit card, or something like that is on it, then you have the right in many places. In fact, the EU has instituted a law where it's mandatory for you to, as an organization, as a company, to take a call from a customer who says, I want you to forget me. So this is the right to be forgotten. And that applies equally to digital records as it does to paper records. So how am I going to go delete you, Casey, from my database if a bunch of content I have about you is on paper? And so just being able to digitize that, but not only digitize that, but also automatically identify that I found Casey's information in here and link it to you and to your customer profile, that allows me to also follow the regulations that are present in my industry.
That's very powerful.
Yep.
Okay, so for anybody that has questions about Ripcord, about the process of getting started, of working with Ripcord, about pricing, all of those things, where should they go?
Yeah, so they can follow our social media accounts. We have a Twitter account. And apologize, I'm coming down with something. But I'm not a robot, so but yeah, so they can follow our social media accounts. We also have a website. It's ripcord.com. You can schedule a demo. You can look at our videos that are up there about our technology. And if you're interested, feel free to reach out through that channel, and then we can have somebody contact you and talk to you about your use cases and your needs.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing all of this info and answering lots of good questions. And hopefully this is the first of many conversations like this, talking about the role that robotics is going to play, both in terms of what Ripcord is doing, but also beyond that, because it's a really fun conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're going to see so much more in terms of robotics and factory automation. And Ripcord is really at the nexus of that innovation.
Absolutely. And anybody who's watching, if you've got specific questions about Ripcord or about robotics generally, hit us up on social. Let us know, because we will be keeping the conversation going, and we love to make sure we're answering questions that are super relevant to all of you.
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Casey, for doing this.
Thank you.